Yo, what's happening? It's your boy Big Ramp in the building. And you already know that you're listening to the King of Wrestling podcast, where they give you all the exclusives, all the important stuff, and all the beautiful people are hanging around right here, baby.
Mirror, mirror on the wall, what's the greatest podcast of them all? Oh, it's you, King of Wrestling podcast. It's you. This is the franchise Chris Black, and I approve this message.
This is your favorite ring announcer, Joey Goats, and you're listening to the King of Wrestling podcast. And now your host, Brandon Turner.
Yes, I am the host with the most. I am Brandon Turner, and you are listening to King of Wrestling podcast, the greatest independent wrestling podcast going today. And we've got a very special guest today, Big Ramp, and he's about to come on in just a few minutes. Stay tuned for that. Check us out on Patreon, patreon.com, KOWP Show. We got exclusive content, watch-alongs, and everything else going on there. Facebook's King of Wrestling Podcast, Twitter's KOWP Show, Instagram KOWP Show. Also, make sure if you hit us on that subscribe button on Apple to give us that 5-star rating. It helps us out a lot. Thank you for joining us today, and we're going to get to our special guest here in just a minute. But before we do, what about this pandemic? No wrestling. I'm getting tired of it, but I think independent wrestling is going to flourish once this pandemic is over, and I think independent wrestling is going to thrive, and I can't wait to get back to it. We've got Big Ramp coming up, and on the other side of this, I'll announce some upcoming guests in the next 3 or 4 weeks. But before we do, let's get to the man of the hour. Let's get to the one, the only. Let's get to Big Ramp. I want to welcome a special guest to King of Wrestling Podcast. I want to welcome Big Ramp. What's going on, Big Ramp? How are you doing tonight?
Oh, man, I'm all right, man. How you doing in these trying times, my brother?
I am trying to make it, man, one day at a time. That's all we can do, man. That's just get through it. But we're going to get back to some wrestling. What my listeners want to know, and I've had a bunch of requests from a lot of my listeners, but a lot of my listeners want to know, was you a wrestling fan growing up, and how did you get into the business?
Yeah, sure. I was a wrestling fan growing up, man. Like I started watching wrestling with my grandparents. Grandparents used to watch wrestling whenever it came on, and they used to go to the wrestling wherever the wrestling was. You know what I'm saying, and stuff like that. And then my sister was like in the army, and she was stationed like all over. And so I got to go to like the Sportatorium and places like that growing up. And you know what I'm saying? Like I've always been into wrestling. Wrestling, it was one of the first things I got into as a child. It's one of the things, like it was a part of me growing up.
You brought up the Sportatorium, and that's a historic building, man. That only people now can dream about going there. You can go back and watch some of the old WCCW stuff and stuff like that. But who were some of your inspirations growing up as a wrestler? I mean, wanting you get into wrestling?
Oh man, like for some reason, and it sounds funny, I had my favorite wrestlers, but I always liked the managers. I always liked the managers, like Gary Hart and Jimmy Hart and Skandar Akbar and Bobby Heenan and Paul E. Dangerously, and you know what I'm saying? And just to name a few. I mean, but like it did. I mean, I always liked the way that they talked and the way that, you know what I'm saying, that the way they could control the crowd and stuff like that. You know what I'm saying? The responses that they got. Like I always used to use a lot of their stuff, like in school. I used to get in trouble in school, just saying a lot of stuff. Like, you know what I'm saying, that I probably shouldn't have been saying because I got it off the wrestling,
Well, the thing about it is, too, with that, you mentioned some names like Gary Hart, Bobby the Brain Heenan. I grew up liking the managers. I grew up watching the managers. Gary Hart could be one of the most evil men in wrestling. And then Bobby the Brain Heenan, you're talking about legendary managers that are hard to find nowadays.
Right. So when like the ones that the legendary managers that's still here, like Heyman and Cornette and people and Jimmy Hart and people like that, when they see me, they like, you keeping it alive. You like you what the sport needs, what it needs to be. With the, you know what I'm saying? Like now you can check all this stuff out. All this stuff is documented and and is available on the World Wide Web.
Well, exactly, because I met you at Widowfest, and you accompanied
Right.
you accompanied Monty Warbucks with Prince Travion to the ring. Yeah, I mean, I can see it. You
That's my
live.
dude. That's my dude, Monty Warbucks. That's my dude, man. Like, I managed Monty Warbucks for a couple of years, man, and I learned a lot with him. Like, you know what I'm saying? I learned a lot from him. I learned, you know what I'm saying? We had a real nice run, man. So when I heard that they were honoring the Prince, I mean, you know, me and Cassidy Riley, we both was like, hey, man, we gonna come, like, you know, we coming through for the Prince. Like, it didn't really turn out how we wanted it to turn out because of the old greasy egg sucking dog overboards, but you know, it's all right though. And Dr. Tom Pritchard, yeah, but it's all right though. We all right.
Well, I'll tell you what, man. I saw Star written on you. Monty is a legend in this part of the country, man. I mean, Monty is just off the charts. If you get Monty in the building, the place could be crickets. But as soon as Monty gets out there, everybody's trying to start a riot. He just
Monty Warbucks is a legend. He's a legend, man. That's like before I came into the region, I didn't know. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I came from working Texas and Louisiana. I like in Florida. I worked all around before. You know what I'm saying? And then when I came into Mississippi, the great people at it was Pro Wrestling Eagle. They put me and Monty together. And when they put me and Monty together, we had a run like no other for like at least about a good three to 4 years.
Yeah, because that's like a platinum record right there, you two. And speaking of records, yourself, you're in the music business yourself, right?
Right, yeah. You know, I've been blessed to do a couple things, you know what I'm saying, in the realm of entertainment. You know, like, you know, besides wrestling, you know what I'm saying? Like, I've done a lot of music that's out there. I got a couple movies that's floating around, you know what I'm saying? Like, I've been I used to work in radio. I try to keep busy. You know what I'm saying? That's what Big Ramp Enterprises, the original, often imitated, never duplicated, Big Ramp Enterprises is.
And speaking of Big Ramp Enterprises, how did you come up with Big Ramp Enterprises? I mean, how did this unfold?
Well, you know, and I say probably like officially probably about like 2009, something like that. I started referring to my conglomerate and my people that I work with as Big Ramp Enterprises, not only in wrestling but actually in music also. So, you know what I'm saying? So Big Ramp Enterprises is a faction in wrestling all around the world, and there's also Big Ramp Enterprises that puts out music, and there's artists, and there's producers, and there's DJs, and you know what I'm saying, and all kind of things under the umbrella of BRE.
Exactly, and you've rubbed some elbows with some big names. Am I correct?
I think everybody's a big name as far as I'm concerned, because I'm like, man, everything's negotiable. It's all business. Everything's negotiable. So you know what I'm saying? Like, if I think everybody's a star. You know what I'm saying? Especially now in these days with the way technology is, everybody's a star. And I'm only here to make sure that, you know, that they're taken care of and represented correctly. Because there's a lot of bad representation out there. Like, you know what I'm saying? So you have to make sure that they're represented correctly and deal with the type of things that a manager or agent is supposed to do. Because that's why I have over 71 clients worldwide and over 9 actual recognized world heavyweight champions as far as NWA, AIWF, and things of that nature.
Now you're from the Big Easy. You're from New Orleans.
Yeah, I'm from New Orleans. That's correct.
You ever ran into Master P or Lil Wayne any?
I mean, hey man, if they check my music out, that speaks for itself. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know, like I've done work with both of those fellas. You know what I'm saying? If you Google Big Ramp, Master P, you'll see the stuff I did with No Limit. If you Google Big Ramp, Lil Wayne, you'll see all the weird videos me and Tune put up. Like, you know what I'm saying? So, you know, you know, they just be tripped out that, you know, that I actually got into wrestling, like as deep as I got into it. Like, you know, like Wayne liked wrestling a lot. Like, you know what I'm saying? Pete got into wrestling himself. So, you know what I'm saying? So for me to take it that extra step, like, you know what I'm saying, to actually having matches and being involved in matches and not just announcing or doing a raffle, you know what I'm saying, or stuff like that. Like, I took it further than that because originally that's all that I think the people wanted me to do at wrestling. They didn't know I was this. Like, you know what I'm saying? They didn't know. Like, they just like, oh yeah, okay. Oh yeah, you from the radio station? You a rapper? Oh yeah, well come do the 50-50 raffle and we're gonna say you're gonna be there. And I'm like, oh, okay. Okay, that's what you okay, we're gonna do this for a little while. And then somebody didn't show up and it was like, hey man, you want manage? And I was like, well, sure, I thought you'd never ask. And then after that we've been running.
Well, that's what I'm talking about. I mean, I saw you in person. Good deal. I mean, you can tear it up on the mic, especially with Monty out there. It was a good thing. Now you brought up the Overboys. What's your problem with the Overboys, man?
My problem goes back to the Great Southern 8 tournament at least about 4 to 5 years ago. Christian Blake robbed Monty Warbucks. Monty Warbucks should have won the Great Southern 8 tournament that year. Christian Blake robbed him. And ever since then, Christian Blake has been a thorn in my side everywhere that I've been, like in down here, everywhere I've been. When I showed up at Elevate, he showed up at Elevate. When I showed up at Pro Wrestling 225, he showed up at Pro Wrestling 225. When I showed up at GSW, he showed up at GSW. Everywhere and when I showed up at Battle Zone, lo and behold, look who's there, Christian Blake. And he got that little dope Brett Landry with him, and so I'm like, oh man, all the time. And then they throw me online. The Overboys, everybody likes them, but they ain't nothing but a bunch of bullies. They're a bunch of bullies and cheaters, and I'm gonna expose them for the frauds and cheaters that they are, because they're a bunch of cheaters.
I can definitely see that. I've seen it the other night when we was at Battle Zone. I saw how they did it. I mean, Monty should have won that match. There's no doubt.
Monty should win every match. Monty should win every match. And then the thing when he doesn't win the matches is always because of something, just some weird rigmarole that somebody pulling off. They pair off referees. They do all kind of stuff. This is a conspiracy. Plymouth Rock landed on us. We was run amok. We was led astray. We was bamboozled.
Well, I'll say this, though. Monty, the night before, on night one of Widowfest, he challenged Christian Blake to the Capital City Championship, and he did take that title.
And beat him. Yes. That's another title. I'm sorry. I mean, I need to be corrected. That is 72 titles and clients all around the world. Thank you, Monty Warbucks, for adding more to Title Town.
But you want me to tell you something? The reason I think that Monty won that night was because Brett Landry wasn't outside trying to cause a distraction. He was not at ringside that night. He was not there, and so Christian had to go in alone, and we see what happens when he goes in alone.
Yeah. I mean, that's what happened. Like, you know what I'm saying? But Brett is. I hate to compliment him, but you know, Brett is he's a presence. He's a presence out there. Like, you know what I'm saying? That's why I had to come and make sure that he didn't do too much, you know, because he's 5 steps away from a big mouth ass whooping.
That's what I'm talking about.
Because it's been coming to him. He knows it's been coming to him since we was. Me and Brett used to be commentary partners. We used to do commentary together at Wildcat. Like, you know what I'm saying? You can look it up. Everything that I'm saying is everything that I say in my interviews are documented, and you can look it up. Just Google it. Like, if you think I'm just saying stuff, like, just Google it, and you can see. Google's your friend. You know what I'm saying? Like, me and Brett started out doing commentary together, and then, you know, we got this Ken and Ryu thing going on, manager-wise. Like, you know what I'm saying? At first, he didn't want me to manage it. He wanted me to stay on the raffle and stuff. And then all of a sudden, he started managing, too. And I was like, well, damn, dog, you told me I shouldn't be doing this, and you came right behind me and did the same thing. But that's neither here nor there. Like, you know what I'm saying? But I commend him with all of the clients that he did get, and he's been picking great clients. Because these are some of the same people that I recruited, or some of the people that I managed. We've actually managed some of the same people. But, you know, once he got in with Christian Blake, you know what I'm saying? It became a dog fest. A whole bunch of dogs.
Well, I will say this though: you have a client at Pro Wrestling 225 that is probably got star written all over him, and that's Chase Bell.
Yeah, Chase Bell's a star. That's all I do is find stars. I find stars. All my Big Ramp Enterprises people are stars. All you have to do is just look them up. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like we have former NWA World Heavyweight Champions, former AIWF World Heavyweight Champions. Like, you know what I'm saying? All we do is we got stars. All around the world is the same song, and BR rerunning it.
Well, let me ask you this about Wildcat. What was it like being around Luke Hawx?
Well, you know, Luke is a direct person. That's what I say about Luke. Luke's a person. He wears his heart on his sleeve. He's an overall good dude. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, but you know, he's a little, you know, but you know, you got to have that desire to be number one. So I get it. I get it. Like, you know what I'm saying? So he's a good dude. And you know what I'm saying? I love what they're doing over there at Wildcat. Like, you know what I'm saying? I'm always gonna root for him. Because I was a part of that at one time. So anything that I was a part of at one time, I want to see win. Like, you know what I'm saying? Because I was a part of that. I put time into that. I want to see everybody do well in professional wrestling, because professional wrestling needs a Wildcat. Professional wrestling needs a Battle Zone. Professional wrestling needs a Ring of Honor. They need every promotion that they have is needed. If it's an actual real promotion that has actual trained wrestlers in it, is needed.
I agree, and you've made the rounds. I mean, you've been in some of the bigger promotions around the state of Mississippi, like you said, Texas, Louisiana. You've also
the world, Craig. The world.
Yeah, the world.
You know
the world.
It's not. You like. I love working in the South, but I worked on the West Coast. I worked on the East Coast. I worked. You know what I'm saying? Like, I worked all over, wrestling wise, not just music wise. I worked all over. So, but I live in the South. I grew up watching Southern wrestling. I prefer being involved with Southern wrestling because that's what I grew up. Like, I grew up with watching CWA and watching Continental and watching World Class, and you know what I'm saying, and just watching, you know what I'm saying, watching all the Memphis stuff. Like, you know what I'm saying, that's the stuff I grew up watching. Like, you know what I'm saying, I mean, we had got the WWE stuff and WWF and all that and AWA and all that stuff on cable, but the stuff that was accessible to me, Mid-South, like, you know what I'm saying, Junkyard Dog, stuff like that. Like these are people that I've seen in my real actual life. Like, you know what I'm saying? Not just on TV. I saw the Junkyard Dog was friends with one of my uncles that lived in the Nightwall. So I've always seen him.
What a legend, too.
Like, you know what I'm saying? Yeah, like, so, like, I don't know why I didn't get into wrestling sooner. I don't know why. I really don't know why I didn't get into wrestling sooner. Because now that I go back and look at things, it was meant for me to do it.
Exactly. We find our niche. Now, you've worked at SWA with Steve Starr. How was that? Big Ramp Enterprises at SWA.
Hey, man. Like, when I came to SWA, I was in the transitional period. Like, the transitional period from, like, leaving Wildcat and just trying to find me a place to work. And when I would say that Steve Starr opened his doors up at SWA and opened his doors up to me and my team, not just me. He opened up the door to me and Reggie and James and the whole team. And when we had a nice run at SWA, I applaud everything that they're doing right now too. I mean, hey, man, I like to see things succeed and thrive. And you know what I'm saying? And I like the program that they have. The television program is A1, tip top. Like, you know what I'm saying? I watch it all the time. I check it out on Fight TV, you know what I'm saying? Because, you know, I'm not in Mississippi, so I can't see it where it come on there. But I check it. I watch everybody's stuff. I check everybody's stuff out. If you got it up and you send it to me, I'm gonna check it out because I'm always looking for new talent.
Well, if you'll check out SWA here in the next couple of weeks, you'll see me on there. I'll be doing commentary with Lanny.
Man. Oh yeah, I'm always with SWA because I got clients over there. Like, you know what I'm saying, or people that I'm planning to bring in other places. I might pop back up at SWA. You never know with me. You never know where I'm going to pop up at. You never know who I'm going to be with. you never know who I'm gonna bring with me.
Exactly. Well, I want to bring up two names that you've been around a few times. I want to bring up Ultimate Gallows and Kobe Rutland.
The Rescue Rangers. They're the Rescue Rangers. They're Mud and Jeff. Them two, Ultimate Gallows and Kobe Rutland. But they're good dudes. They're good dudes. They love wrestling. They're passionate about what they do. They tirelessly record and do commentary for matches. Like, you know what I'm saying, in the southern region and beyond. You know what I'm saying? They put miles. Well, Kobe put miles because New don't like to drive. Kobe put miles on the car everywhere. Like he came pick me up. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, hey, like, and I live nowhere close to Kobe Rutland. Nowhere close. And he came pick me up. You know what I'm saying? Like, he brought me in a Rock and Roll Express, JP and them around for WrestleMania. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, you know, he's a good dude. He's a good dude. I mean, a great commentator. Like, you know what I'm saying? He's even a hell of a little singer. He got a nice little voice. He like Justin Bieber mixed with Jack Swagger. So he like Jack Bieber Hager.
There you go. That's a good name. Yeah. Oh, Kobe don't live but about an hour and a half from my house. So.
Okay, well, imagine that. Hour and a half. He lives at least 3 to 4 hours from me.
I was exactly fixing to say it because I know I live probably about 2-3 hours from New Orleans, so I know he lives a little about the same, 3.5.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, up next, I'd like to ask you a question about, none other than maybe some stuff that you've seen on NXT here recently.
Man. First off, I want to applaud people getting opportunities and shots at things that they've been wanting to do their whole life. Like, you know what I'm saying? So I have to watch my words carefully here. But they say imitation is the most sincerest form of flattery. But I'm not flattered at all. Like right now. Like Stokely Hathaway, a.k.a. Malcolm Bivens, has now named his faction in NXT Bivens Enterprises Records or something like that. But if you look at Bivens Enterprises Records, that's BER.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of close. It's kind of close, bro.
That is very close.
Yeah, and it ain't like it's not like he's not aware of the actual enterprise. I expected that type of stuff from Marty Scurll. I didn't expect that from him, but I feel like he just made his NXT team, and I liked it up until he said that. I was rooting for him. Like truth be told, man, you did a whole other interview before this.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I'm saying? And then I had a little technical difficulties on my end. So we had to redo it. But in that interview, you know that what I said I was rooting for him because I wanted to see him, people like him.
You praised him. You praised him to the moon.
Yes. Right. And then no later than a day after we did this interview, I see this. I'm like, wow. Like, you know what I'm saying? So I reached out to him. I put some disparaging things on the internet. You know what I'm saying? I reached out to him. No response. Like, because he know he wrong. So it is. But it is what it is. I wish him the best. I hope that he does the best he can with his enterprise. You know what I'm saying? Because now I see that we have room for a Cornette Heyman thing going. And whenever he want to do it, we can. Because the real original enterprise, the only enterprise that really matters, is here. And we want all the smoke anyway.
That's Big Ramp.
And that's a whole other thing in itself, because we've been saying that too. And you know what? I'm not going to start. I know they're watching. I know they're listening, so it is what it is. Come see me.
Exactly, and hopefully we can get you to WWE, because I can tell you this right now, you got Star written all over you, and I don't understand how you haven't got signed yet.
See, the thing is, I also do music. So I'm still on tour as far as with Take 4 and Jubilee and you know what I'm saying, we got some No Limit stuff coming up. Like I'm still on tour musically and I'm still filming movies. So how, like I can't do the schedule. but I don't have enough. I don't have enough. I guess I don't have enough. To for them to give me a time schedule. I'm not. Who am I to want that? Like, you know what I'm saying? So it's not logistic. It's not logistical for me. Like, not right now, unless they have to really make it worth. You know what I'm saying? Me
worth your while.
Stop doing all that because once I do that, I can't do nothing else, and I'm just there. So, you know what I'm saying? I know they have a music department. I know they have everything that I do. Also, if they can tie me into everything, then we could talk. But I don't think they'll do that for somebody just coming in. Well, you know what I'm saying? Like with 10 years of experience, they'll do that. I don't think they'll do that like that unless it really was beneficial for them.
Exactly. Well, you know, we're gonna start wrapping up here in just a minute. But before we do get to wrapping up, I just want to ask a couple more things. You got any good road stories? You got any good stories at all? That you can tell?
The ones that I can tell, you know what I'm saying? I've had good experience on the road. Like, I really feel like me and John Paul LeBlanc, he's a photographer with Full Corner Photography. He takes a lot of pictures all around. I feel like we were attacked by a Bigfoot one night.
No.
Like, I really...
A Bigfoot?
Because look, we was matter of fact, we was coming to Mississippi. I think was it Battle? No, it wasn't Battle Zone. But we were going to Mississippi. I'm joking, we got the windows down. I'm joking with him. I'm like, hey man, you think they got the Honey Island swamp monster? That's where the conversation started. So we went to talking about all kind of, like, you know, the Loch Ness monster, aliens, Bigfoot. So when I mentioned Bigfoot, I heard a weird sound, and that's when we was driving up there, right?
Right.
And they had people riding on bikes on the highway. So I was like, man, Bigfoot gonna get them. Man, you just heard that sound? Jokingly. Okay. So then we go do the show. We're on the road back. It's raining. We riding. We get to the same spot. Something flew from all the way across. Now, mind you that the wind is going in the same direction we going. Something cut across the wind going at least 40 miles per hour and hit the car. Like they threw something at the car to try to make us get out and stop. I said, bro, he like, man, you want to pull over and check it out? I said, no, man, that's how they get us. That's how they get us. That's how they get us, man. Like, that's in every horror movie ever made. There's always one person that say, hey, man, let's check it out. But there's never the voice of reason to tell him, no, man, let's keep going.
Yeah, that one that tells you to wants to get out and check it, that's the one that don't survive.
I am that voice of reason. JP was not the voice of reason that night. He wanted to check it out. He wanted to get mauled by a Bigfoot.
Mm-mm.
We don't know if he Harry and the Hendersons. We don't know if he nice and paint flowers and eat flowers and stuff. We don't know none of that. He already threw something at the car. So you really want to test your luck? You big bucks, no whammies. We don't want none of that.
No, that's where you stay out of the way and you just keep driving. And that's what you did.
Yes.
And that's how you stay alive.
That's why I'm here today in the midst of a pandemic, and I'm here today to be able to tell you that we were almost attacked by a Bigfoot, and I've lived to tell the story.
Wow, that's our first Bigfoot story right here on the King of Wrestling podcast.
Hey, man, maybe they'll get you some cross promotion. Saying if you cut that clip out and put it online and say Bigfoot story, because you know they got a lot of weird stuff like that on. And once you go down the rabbit hole.
Oh yeah, I mean I've kept up with Bigfoot. I've actually seen some of them Unsolved Mysteries pictures of that Bigfoot walking across in the Florida Everglades. So,
see, but honestly, I really think that Christian Blake is a Bigfoot, and he just shaved.
I could agree with that too. Everything lines up just right. You might be right. He may be shaving the face and all that just to make it look just like he's a human.
Yeah, because because he don't just wear tights. He got the whole thing covered up. So he just hiding his Teen Wolf. He hiding his Teen Wolf.
Hey, I fully agree with you there. Well, before we wrap up, I'm going to give you the floor, man. You can promote, you can sell, you can plug whatever you want to. The floor is yours.
Okay, make sure you check me out on Big Ramp 504 on YouTube. That's my YouTube channel, Big Ramp TV. It'll link you to all my music, wrestling, and all kind of weird other stuff. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you're over 18, get your parents' permission. What else? I got music out. Make sure you on all streaming platforms. Make sure you go get NL Big Ramp Music. That's all. That's BIGRAMP. And I'm all the Big Ramps. I'm BIGGRAMP. Big Numbers. BIGGNUMBERZ. Make sure you pick all that stuff up. Go to mpgte.com. Go check out Kobe Running Body Slam Media Productions. I got a whole bunch of stuff on there. You know what I'm saying? Stay tuned to this podcast because they bring in all of the talent from all over. You know what I'm saying? Like, shout out to Amber Rodriguez.
Amber.
The Queen. The new BRE heavyweight champion. Matter of fact, like, you know what I'm saying? So shout her out and shout out all the rest of the team. And we win it. Title time. We can't be stopped even if they're trying to stop us.
Exactly. And you brought up Amber Rodriguez, who's a good friend of the podcast, and she is on fire. And I believe by the end of this year, if we can get back to some wrestling, I think she's going to be signed somewhere big.
She's once again, Big Ramp Enterprises. She down, and she's a star. That's why we put her. That's why she has been pegged to lead the women's division. Like, you know, we don't have too many girls in prize, like, you know what I'm saying? And when we do sign a girl, the girl is exceptional. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like Amber Rodriguez, her name speaks for itself. Like, you know what I'm saying? The Reina Renegada. She's the Queen Renegade. She do her thing. It is what it is.
Exactly. She is great. I'll tell you that right now. Well, Big Ramp, I appreciate you coming on, man.
Oh, man, anytime, man. Like, next time, I'm gonna fix my little technical issue, man. We're gonna do a video one next time, man. You know
exactly. Next time we're gonna kick up the video and we're gonna do it because we had a good video going and just no audio. But man, we're gonna fix it up next time and we're gonna get you back on for sure. That's no doubt there.
Oh, it's all good, man. Anytime, man. Thanks for having me.
Man, I gotta thank Big Ramp for coming on. I really appreciate him doing that and taking his time out right here for King of Wrestling podcast. And we've been going strong. And coming up in June the 1st, a little over a month, will be the 1-year anniversary of King of Wrestling Podcast. Wow, 1 year for the King of Wrestling Podcast. Can't wait for that. We've got upcoming guests next week right here on King of Wrestling Podcast. We've got Brandon Watley, who's going to tear up the airwaves and take over the show. Then the week after that, we've got John Moxley's trainer, Cody Hawk, coming on. We're going to talk to him about John Moxley, Sami Callihan, Eli Drake, some of the great names, Shauna Reed, some of the great names that he has trained himself. And we're going to talk about all those guys right in there. And even Mr. Carl Anderson, we're even going to touch on that. Also, the week after that, we've got none other than the hardcore princess herself, Jules Malone, coming. So make sure you tune in for that. That's for the next 3 weeks. We got Brandon Watley, Cody Hawk, and Jules Malone. So make sure you check it out. I want to thank Big Ramp for coming on one more time. And I'm ready to get this pandemic over. I'm ready to get some independent wrestling going. And if you're in the same boat as I am, comment on some of our videos on YouTube. Check us out on King of Wrestling Podcast. We're uploading videos. We're going to get more stuff going on there. But just check it out and comment on us on King of Wrestling Podcast Facebook page. That's at King of Wrestling Podcast, so check that out as well. I want to thank everybody that supports King of Wrestling Podcast. I appreciate everything you do. And I guess we'll see you Friday with Wrestling with Breakfast because me and Marcus and Mike, we got a lot of things to talk about and discuss. And we're going to also review another match this week. So make sure you tune in to Wrestling with Breakfast this Friday right here on King of Wrestling Podcast. We'll see you Friday.
You are listening to Turner Podcast Network.